Hello, everyone. Welcome to Morning Manna. I thought I was done, y'all. I know. But welcome to part six of learning how to enjoy reading the scriptures. And the Lord told me that you did not cover this. And so he shared with me, how does he speak through names and places? Names and places. One principle that is really lost to a degree in the times that we're living in is the importance of how we name our children. How we name our children. When someone was named in the Bible, it meant something. Their destiny, their future, their purpose was tied to their name. Okay. So for a lot of people, I see some of these names, and let me tell you something. I'm a pharmacist, and I see these names, and I'm telling you, I'm baffled to how we got to it. I'm very baffled. And I think we really have kind of made naming our children more of a trendy thing instead of a destiny and a purpose thing. So, those of you who do not have children at this point, please take it seriously when it comes to naming your children because their destiny can be tied to the name that the Lord desires to give them. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to go over a couple of names to show you the principle at work of how the name of someone tied to their future, it tied to their destiny, it tied to their calling. We could start with Noah. The name Noah means rest or comfort. And we know that God gave Noah rest when Noah was obedient to God and was obeyed God to build the ark. And ultimately, when God judged the world, Noah and his family was found at rest. They were at peace. They were safe in the ark. We can then look at Abraham, and Abraham's name means the father of many nations. And of course, in Genesis 12, we see God change his name from Abram to Abraham, and of course, he would be the father of many nations. Okay. Then it also says that Jacob had a grandson. Okay. We're going to skip Isaac. Isaac means laughter. Of course, we know where that comes from. But Jacob, his name means supplanter or heal. And we know that Jacob would trick his brother Esau out of the birthright by getting him to trade in for a bowl of soup. And of course, Jacob's name will ultimately be changed to Israel or Israel. And the name Israel means one who strives with God, one who strives with God or prince of God. Okay, we're going to talk about Israel in just a second. Now, Jacob had 12 boys. I am not going over all 12 boys' names, but I want to highlight a couple of them. Reuben, who is the firstborn son, his name is Reuben, means to behold a son. Look, a son, see a son. Okay. We know that the third son would be named Levi. Of course, this is where we get the Levitical priesthood, right? Levi means joined or united. Now, I'm highlighting Levi in this case because he had three sons, Gershon, Kohat, and Miri, I believe, Miri. And so the reason I highlight that is because the name Levi means joined or unite, and it was Levitical priesthood that would serve the nation by serving in the temple. And it was their responsibility at the appointed days and times to bring the people together as one man, as one nation to celebrate the holy days and the feasts at the temple. Now, he had a son named Kohat. I'm highlighting Kohat for a reason. Kohat means congregation. It would be the responsibility of the Kohatites, the sons of Kohat, the Kohat part of his family. Their responsibility was to carry the Ark of the Covenant. And so we know that the Ark of the Covenant was carried by four priests. And what did we learn about the lesson of the number four? The number four is the number of the corporate man, the number of the congregation. And these four priests would carry the Ark of the Covenant not by their hand, but on their shoulders. and they would carry the Ark of the Covenant. And what that was a picture of is that the presence of God, the Ark of the Covenant, is carried by a congregation. The number four is the congregation. And then the name of the priest that carried it meant congregation. Of course, we know the fourth son, how unique is that? Four is the number of the congregation, is Judah. And Judah's name means praise. And we know out of the tribe of Judah, we would get our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Okay. You had people like Moses. His name means to pull out or draw out of water, right? And we know Moses' testimony is that Pharaoh called because the children, the Hebrew children, were growing in waves and waves, and they were having babies, and he sent his armies to kill the boys, throw them into the Nile where the crocodiles was. But Moses' mother would not allow that to happen. He put them in a basket with pitch around it, like mud or a pitch around it, so that the water couldn't get into the basket, and then set him on the river and sit him down the river. And we know ultimately it would be Pharaoh's daughter that would find Moses and pull him out of the water. We know that Moses would be the deliverer. He would be the one that God sends to deliver his people. But anything that comes out of the water comes out of the word, and it comes out of the promise of God. Okay? The promise of God was that he was going to deliver his people. And the promise came through Moses. All right. We can get into Joshua, right? Joshua's name means Yahweh is salvation. Okay. We know it would be Joshua's responsibility to what? To lead the children of Israel out of the wilderness into the promised land. Okay. And ultimately, Joshua would have to confront the seven nations in the promised land. Now, Joshua only got the sixth of the seven. Caleb would kill the seventh one off. But it's because they believed the truth that they would overcome the seven nations that were mightier than Israel. But because they believed that God said the land was theirs, they believed that when they go in there, they can take it because God gave it to them. So Yahweh is salvation, okay? Then you can get to the prophets. You could talk about Jeremiah. His name means Yahweh has raised or exalted. Remember, Jeremiah was a boy. Okay, he was just a boy. And he says, don't think that you're a child before I've ordained you to be a prophet among the nations. Don't be afraid of men in their faces. And he says, you will tear down, destroy, and rebuild because I've put my word in your mouth. Don't say that you are a child. And we know Jeremiah would give just awesome prophecies, but also he would have a whole book of lamentations of how he would cry out for the condition of God's people. We know Nehemiah's name means Yahweh comforts. All right. How did Yahweh comfort through Nehemiah? He began to rebuild the walls at Jerusalem. We could talk about Ezekiel, which means God will strengthen. God will strengthen you. How? He lamented the state of Israel and the state of the temple and the things that the ancients were doing in the temple and the idolatry. And he lamented that. And he asked for God to comfort him and to keep him, that he may be able to speak his word to his people and judge the people for the wrong and the sin that was being done in the nation. Okay, we can look at Solomon. We say Solomon was the wisest king, right? Solomon's name means peaceful one, and the name Solomon comes from part of the word which is shalom, which is what? Peace. Okay, or rest. We can look at the Daniel. Daniel means what? God is my judge. And we know Daniel stood completely for God. He would not turn his back on God. Despite what anyone would do, he just believed God would judge him, and he would stand firmly on what God had told him and his faith. Okay, we talk about Isaiah means salvation is of the Lord. The name Isaiah means salvation is of the Lord. And we know if you read through the book of Isaiah, you see many prophecies that speak of the coming of the Messiah. Okay. And so those are just a couple of names that Jehoshaphat means Yahweh has judged, and we know that God does judge His house. He sets judges to help deal with what controversies and standards, and with the doctrine and the law and the commandments, how to bring reconciliation and peace to uh, God's people. And so when you read the testimony of Jehoshaphat, you will see how God uses him to do that. Okay, so that's just people. Okay, let's talk about a lot of famous places and how God locks principles in these places. Two of the most famous places, of course, we know that Jacob visited them. He would call one place Bethel. Beth is house, El is God. So the word Bethel means house of God. Anytime you see the word Bethel, you're going to be speaking concerning the house of God. And we're not talking about the four wall building, but we're talking about the family of God. It would also be at this place called Peniel. Peniel, where Jacob would wrestle with the angel, right? Peniel means he saw the face of God. So not only did he see or name Bethel, but he also named a place called the face of God. So it will be in the house of God that we shall fellowship and see the face of God. Now we're not talking about, it says no man can see God and live, but we shall look into his face, his glorious face, and we'll be able to seek his face and turn from our wicked. There you go. Turn from our wicked ways. You got it. All right. Then there's the wonderful place called Jerusalem. Jerusalem. What does the name Jerusalem mean? Jerusalem is made up of two words, Jireh and Shalom. Jireh and Shalom. We know that God carries the name Jehovah Jireh, God, my provider. And then you have Shalom, which means peace. So when we say Jireh, Shalom, the name Jerusalem means the place where God provides peace. That's right. And remember, there is the new Jerusalem. It's the temple and the city made not by the hands of man. And the new Jerusalem is the house of God. The new Jerusalem is the sons of God. Yes, it's the place where God provides peace. All right. Then we also have Babel, the Tower of Babel. And we get the word Babel means what? Confusion. Ultimately, in that same place, we get the place called Babylon, right? Babylon. And we know in Babylon, it would be confusion and idolatry. And we know the children of Israel were sent into Babylon for 7 years because of their failure to obey God. So Babylon is a picture of religious slavery. It brings confusion amongst God's people. All right. There was a place called Lodabar. Lodabar. Now, where, Calvin, we get this place called Lodabar? Well, if you know the story of David and Jonathan, we know that Jonathan, they made a tie, a covenant that they would care for one another all the days of their life. And we know that Jonathan protected David from Jonathan's father, Saul, from killing him. Well, ultimately, Jonathan would die at the hands of the Philistines. But before he died, he had a son called Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth, as they were fleeing from Israel, his nurse was carrying him and he fell, and I guess she tripped and fell, and he became lame in the feet and he could not walk. And he dwelt in a place called Lodebar. Okay. And when you take the word Lodebar, it means no pasture or no word. No pasture or no word. Ultimately, King David, in his graciousness and in his heart for Jonathan, he asked if there was anyone in Saul's house that he could be gracious to. He said there was a son that was in Lodabar, and his name was Mephibosheth. And so he called for Mephibosheth to leave Lodabar and come into Jerusalem. I hope you caught that. Leave the place where there's no word and come into a place where there is the word and where you will find peace. And it will be in Jerusalem that Mephibosheth would sit at David's table, the king's table, and eat of his table for the rest of his life. That whole story is a whole beautiful picture of many of us that have come out of exile, that have come out of a place called Lodabar, the place where there's no word and no pasture and no rest. But when we came into the house of God, we begin to fellowship at the king's table and we'll eat there continually. Man, this is good, y'all. Then there's a place called Moab. And we know now there were places in the Bible that were named after people. This is one of them, okay? Because there was Lot, and Lot had two daughters. One night Lot got drunk and everything, and his daughter said, "Oh, we're gonna sleep with our father, and he's gonna get us pregnant. And guess what? We're going to name two sons after him." They had two sons. One was named Moab, and the other one was named Ben-Ami. Okay, the name Moab means what father? What father? We don't regard fathers, right? And then you have Ben-Ami, which means son of my people. And of course, that's the spirit of democratic rule. Now, Moab was not just a person, but it became a place. And if you go and read the book of Ruth, you know that Naomi and her family, I think his name was Elimelech, and her two sons would leave Jerusalem, Judah, and go to Bethlehem, Judah. I'm sorry, Bethlehem, Judah. I believe that's what it was called. Left there and went into Moab. Do you know what happened when they got into Moab? All the men died. Naomi's husband died, and then Ruth and Orpha's husbands, which were her two sons, they died too. So the place called Moab is a place that disregards or destroys fathers. You see how God locks principles in places? And then there's just called, of course, Ammon, which is son of my people. That's the spirit of democratic rule or the rule of the people. And we can go on and on. We talk about Bethlehem, which means house of bread. Where would Jesus be born? Jesus would be born in Bethlehem, the house of bread. So these places, when you're studying the scriptures, it's very important to take the time out to look up what the names of these places mean. There was a young man named Jephthah who had been cast out from his family. And ultimately, he'd been cast out of his family. He goes to this place called Tob. The word Tob, or the place called Tob, means good because it would be in Tob that he would learn how to lead armies. Ultimately, the Ammonites come and they terrorize the family that he left from. I think it was the Ephraimites, I believe. And ultimately, they call for Jephthah to come out of Tob and help lead the people against the Ammonites. But he had to go to a place called Tob, which meant good, because he learned and he was prepared for the work that he was called to do and called to do to the very people who cast him out. See, this is how we start putting principles together. You've got to get the name. What does the name mean? And then when you get the place, you got to understand what the place means. And then you can put them together. Then you may start seeing numbers and colors and symbols. It makes reading the scriptures exciting. But here's the thing. Do we really want to invest that level in time of study to learn it? Do we? because that's what this still comes back to. And I did a message on this. It has to be in you. It has to be a desire of yours to want to know what God has. See, God locks principles and mysteries in these things. He locks them in names. He locks them in numbers. He locks them in colors. He locks them in places. He locks them all through the symbology of the scriptures. But do you really want to take the time? How much time are we willing to give to God and study his word? Meditate on the law day and night, that we will be like a tree planted beside the rivers of water. Yep, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf shall not wither. And it says that the leaves in Revelation is for the healing of the nations. And whatsoever he do shall prosper. You have to study the scriptures. The scriptures have been given by inspiration of God for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, and instruction in righteousness, that you may be matured unto all good works. Now I think I'm done with this series now. I pray I'm done with this series. And so I pray that you have enjoyed this. I pray you go back and listen to it. I've set it up as a playlist under the Journey Through Sonship podcast. You can listen to these messages over and over again. Do not take this for granted. I believe in teaching as I love teaching. I love seeing people grow. I love seeing people learn. But it will require sacrifice and time. It's how bad do you want to know it? We got to stop being so grubby for instant gratification and really sit down with the scriptures and read and study them and highlight and do some research. Get that concordance out. Look up what words mean based upon the language you're using. It could be in Greek, it could be in Hebrew. So may God bless each and every one of you as you study the scriptures, to study to show thyself approved unto God. A workman need not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth, which is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, and instruction in righteousness, that you may be matured unto all good works. God bless you. I love you. Till we meet again on Morning Manna.